Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Banned Books Book Club. I'm here with Katrina. If you want to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Katrina. Hopefully you're all used to me by now.
Yeah.
But I am the other host of the Banned Books Club, and Nirali and I have been switching off every month which channel we're doing these live streams on.
Yeah.
And talking about books with.
Yeah. Last month we had a really fascinating discussion on Juno Dawson's.
Oh, we did lose her. It's a little awkward. Yep.
Hello. Sorry.
Hey.
I accidentally was trying to switch tabs and accidentally exited out of the stream. Hopefully
it's okay.
The last error. Last month we talked about Juno Dawson's This Book is Gay, and we had a really interesting discussion. And this month we are talking about Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. I really loved this book. What about you?
Yeah, I really liked it. I thought it was a useful tool in exploring both the history of race over time and how it's been constructed, and also how we can start to deconstruct it and build a better society.
Yeah. And a bit about the author. He's a professor, specifically talking about racism, specifically researching racism, and he founded the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. And before this book, he wrote Stamped: The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, and he's written a few more books on anti-racism since then. Yeah, do you want to talk about why it was banned?
So it was banned because this book talks about race. It says it in the title. But it was Ibram X. Kendi has been accused of corrupting children with the view that everyone is racist, which even within his definitions of racism, that is like the first thing you get in chapter 1, he's very clear that that's not what is happening. People who ban books hate reading, so
yeah. I mean, it seems like based on the books we've read thus far, the book banners are picking very easy targets. They're picking the book with the rainbow flag on the cover. They're picking the book that says racist in the title. They're, not reading these books. But it's especially egregious here because the first thing the author does is make a delineation between anti-racist and racist, and this idea of being not a racist. And what he says is you can't be not a racist because you're simply denying something. You have to be one or the other. And then he says you can be racist one day and anti-racist the next, and then racist again the next. So it's not a static definition for a person.
And I like it because I contain multitudes, and lots of those multitudes are mistakes I've made.
Exactly. And one of the best part of this book is that the author talks about himself so much and weaves his personal narrative of mistakes, of racist mistakes, through this really academic text and really scholarly text to show how you can work towards anti-racism.
I think that's a good and healthy acknowledgement that we will make mistakes throughout our lives. And that doesn't mean like you should throw yourself away as a person. It means you should learn and grow and continue to become a better person. I mean, a middle schooler called me cringe last week. Was he accurate? Yes. Am I ashamed of what I was doing that was cringy? No.
Yay.
Am I ashamed of the cringe I had 10 years ago? Absolutely. That shit was not okay.
Yeah, there are things that, because we've been on YouTube for so long, there are things on my channel that I'm just like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that thing. I shouldn't have done that thing. Oh, I was so clearly a teenager when I said that. And I've grown so much since then. And yeah, it's like you're allowed to cringe at your former self's mistakes as long as you grow from them. And that's kind of what Ibram X Kendi does with this book. He shows his mistakes. He opens with a racist speech that he won an award for and talks about how he changed from that speech.
Yeah. And I think that's both a show of how he has grown as a person, but it's also like it's a roadmap. We are not trapped into the people we once were, nor are we beholden to like the racist ideas and ideologies that we have grown up around. It is a permission to grow and do better. And I like the book as a permission structure to do that, because I have made mistakes.
Yeah, and like just getting stuck in the guilt of having made a mistake is not productive. It's not helping anyone. It's not helping yourself. It's not helping whoever you harmed in that mistake. It's just kind of letting something fester. And this is going, here's how you grow and learn and change and act upon your changed self to help build a better world.
I think that's both a beautiful and a great thing that we get to do. Is to have that. And I also enjoyed, so we both listened to the audiobook, which is of the second edition, right? Okay. So one thing I really liked is within this permission structure that Ibram X Kendi is not only reflected on his own time growing up and the racist ideas that he fell for, as many of us have. He also makes several corrections and annotations throughout the book of where he has changed things and why, to show that even like the 2 or 3 years since this book has been published, he has grown as a person and accepted feedback. And a lot of these annotations are about, let's say, specific parts of the communities that he is not a part of and where he could do better, because he's still growing. And I love that. I love authority figures admitting when they're wrong.
Exactly. It's so great because one of the very first things he corrects is that he used I think the word crazy, and that he later learned was used in an ableist manner and changed the word. And from that, he continues on and corrects his language and corrects his speech where he is able to and where he learned to do better. And that's why, like, we will later talk about some things that could be improved with this book. I genuinely think that things will be improved should a third edition of this book come out, or should he write a new book.
Yeah, which should say he's also written new books since How to Be an Anti-Racist came out. Specifically, he has written How to Raise an Anti-Racist, which is a parenting book meant for adults, but also the board book, Anti-Racist Baby. And I've only seen the cover, but it's so cute.
It looks really cute. And board books are board books for a reason. They have very few words. They don't really say much. They're a cute little way for a baby to learn to read. And to read to your child.
They're also, in my experience, things that your child can teeth on and it won't be destroyed.
That's why they're made from thick board instead of paper, so your baby can't tear the book and your baby can't eat the book.
Yeah, which I think parents everywhere can appreciate. Books are expensive.
Oh,
and babies are destructive.
Yeah. And board books are generally a lot less expensive than like picture books of the same book. So, yeah.
Yeah. I don't
Score one for
understand
board books.
why that is, but there's a reason, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I don't understand much about the production process.
I think I have ideas about it, but I don't think that's within the scope of this stream.
Yeah.
But yes, he wrote Anti-Racist Baby. He wrote How to Raise an Anti-Racist. And I think, what else did he wrote one more book since Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. So before he wrote before he wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, he wrote Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. And then he followed that book up with another book called Stamped. So
yeah. And that is what is actually a collaboration with Jason Reynolds, a noted YA author, who I think personally wrote one of the worst Spider-Man books. I'm just gonna say it. It's not a very good Spider-Man book. There's not very much Spider-Man.
Yeah. Is he the one who wrote The Long Way Down?
Yeah, I think he also wrote that.
Yeah, that was a really good book. Read
Yeah.
his original work, don't read his Spider-Man book, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's the lesson here that I want everyone to take. Jason Reynolds is a fine author, but he didn't put Spider-Man in until like the last 3 chapters, and I will never forgive him. But Stamped is wonderful because it is meant as a young adult resource, and he worked with a young adult author to make sure the text was both accessible to younger readers who are earlier in their journey of learning about racism, provides them the language that they need to express lots of ideas they already have, because you often internalize and understand the ideas before you have the language, and kept it to be an engaging read that I think teenagers would actually be interested in doing, and doing it all in a way that does not talk down to the reader. And that's all super hard to do. And I think Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds did a great job with that book. I have not read the adult version.
Yeah, I really want to read so the adult version is a history, and I believe the young adult version is about the here and now a little bit more. So I think that's one is a history text, and the other is kind of an action.
Yeah,
text,
it connects the history to what is going on right now in a way that is more, I would say, precise and also condensed, because young adult nonfiction also tends to be shorter than adult nonfiction. We gotta learn a lot of stuff when we're a teenager. Sometimes things just be shorter.
Yeah. So, but back to this book, this book is definitely what surprised me about this book being banned is that it really feels like it's written for adults. It's written as an academic text. It's an accessible academic text that's accessible to non-academics, I think. But it is very much an academic text that cites 1,000,001 scholars, and it really grounds. The way he writes is grounding his research in his personal narrative, but it is very much research heavy, research focused, which I think is fantastic. It is how I feel one should write a persuasive guidebook that will convince the reader of something, because while there are some things I think that could be improved, there's some things that I want to read more about, to learn more about from other writers. I was thoroughly convinced by this book. And I think the reason why we're both Asian, and I think a lot of what we've been reading in the Banned Books Book Club doesn't feel like it's written for us. It feels like it's written for white people. And this book, while it does focus on white people, he makes a point at the very beginning of the book to say that his audience is both white people and people of color. And he maintains that focus throughout the book. He talks about internalized racism. He talks about internalized biases. I don't feel he would call it internalized racism. I feel like he would call it internalized biases and unlearning those. And I think that those are lessons that a lot of people of color, including me, can take away from this book.
Yeah. I will also say I really appreciated that because it also felt, it had a way, because he was writing for this like double audience, of feeling both broader, and there were points where I knew he was writing specifically for me as a non-Black person of color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like it had the move to narrow down and be more specific, and be able to use these like complex ideas and language to describe the experience of racism to someone who has experienced racism, although not always to the same extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really useful and hard thing to do, because I think if it were easy, more people would do it.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope.
Yeah, because there are intersections within racism. There's a lot of anti-Asian racism that exists, and there's a lot of anti-Black racism within Asian communities that exists. So it's just very clear that he acknowledges all of that, and he even writes that the idea that only white people can be racist is false, and then proves that by describing situations in which Asian people have been racist, Black people have been racist, Latino people have been racist. Like every kind of person can be racist in a different way, and to reduce racism to just white people erases a lot of racist experiences that people have had, and that's not useful at all. And what's more useful is this framing of everyone having the ability to have racist ideology, and everyone has to take steps to remove that ideology from their lives and be an anti-racist and work towards that.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that really helped, that was really helped by him including so much of his own personal story, because he always treats his past self with compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me feel more willing to admit when I've made mistakes and to want to be better, knowing that I am deserving of that same compassion.
Mm-hmm. Because if someone, it's again, if it's the thing of if someone just straight up calls you a racist, you go on the defense and say, I'm not a racist. But if someone talks to you about your racist ideology, you can start working towards being anti-racist. And I really think that's a huge thing I learned with this book. And another thing I learned is obviously he has the book stamped, which goes further into the history of racism. He focuses on precisely where racism comes from. And I kind of have grown with the idea that racism equals power plus prejudice, which kind of turns into only white people can be racist. But because he focuses on where racism comes from, it allows us to follow an argument he makes against the idea that racism equals power plus prejudice, because racism is the excuse powerful people make to gain more power or retain their power over other people.
Yeah. And I would also say that it's very clear that even as he combats that idea, he's still very clear that there are power structures that reinforce racism.
Yeah.
There are policies built within like governments, companies, and all of these things by people with power that reinforce racist ideas that make it harder to be a people of color.
Yeah.
But that also doesn't excuse individual actions taken within that system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what he does is, instead of focusing on racist ideology, he kind of asks the audience to focus on policies that reinforce racist ideology, which is a shift in framework, because a lot of times we hear that we have to, you know, convince white people that we're not subhuman in some way or the other. But it's like, that's not going to change someone's mind. It's not, but changing a racist policy will, because changing racist policies will help everyone. He discusses the Affordable Care Act, which is an anti-racist policy. He discusses, oh gosh, what else does he discuss? He discusses a lot, but the one that jumped out for me was the Affordable Care Act, because once people started living with the anti-racist policy of the Affordable Care Act, and more white people also had health insurance, everyone started defending the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah. I think a lot of anti-racist policies act with like the curb cut effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
No.
Okay, so when you are walking down the street at the curbs, there's a part where it slants down.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there are like little bumps put in at that curb cut, and there are lots of reasons for that. One of the biggest reasons is because it makes our cities more walkable and wheelchair accessible. The bumps are put in for people who are blind so that they can feel it with their cane. And what happened when all these curb cuts were suddenly put in, probably around the time we were growing up, or shortly before it, given when the ADA passed, because of this, the cities became more accessible and easier to navigate and more walkable for everyone. These curb cuts made it easier for like delivery drivers taking things to stores from their trucks. It made it easier for parents with strollers. It made it easier for joggers. It also made the curbs more visible from cars for pedestrians, because there was a clear place for pedestrians to wait when they were about to cross the street.
Mm-hmm.
So it made all of our cities safer, more navigable, and better for everyone. But it was intended to help a specific group of people. And I think anti-racist policies work a lot like that. You are targeting a specific problem. Like the ACA specifically extended the lives of people of color who received subpar healthcare because they did not have health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't able to access that preventative care. The ACA fixed a lot of that. Not all of it. There's more ways to go. But it also made things better for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I personally am quite fond of the provision that birth control should be a thing that is covered.
Yep.
Because having a uterus should not count as a pre-existing condition. It's weird that it was.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's really, really, really weird.
It's half the people have it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things that's like, even the anti-racist policies can be improved. Even this anti-racist book needed a second edition to improve. There's always something that can be better, that can work better for everyone, and be more inclusive.
Yeah, and when we implement these policies, it's usually better for everyone, and that's great.
Yep. I also think eyewear should be covered by most health insurance.
Yeah. And my teeth, they're just bones that are outside.
Mm-hmm.
It covers the bones that are inside. I don't get it.
Yeah. Just, that would help a lot of people. But yeah, back to the book. I think it's one of the things I also, there were kind of new terms for me that I learned, and I kind of want to talk about segregation versus assimilation versus kind of the racist act of segregation versus having your own space for your own people, because he talked a lot about that, and it was really interesting. And it's funny because in practice I know exactly what he's talking about, but I've never kind of read about it. Like growing up, I had space that was majority white and technically desegregated, which was school. I was a brown person in a majority white school. There were a lot of Asians. There were a few Black people in my school growing up, but it was technically desegregated. And then I had the technically segregated space of my Indian community growing up. But I felt a lot more like myself in the Indian community than I did in school. And that's because he talks about the way kind of segregating different groups of people, desegregating people creates an imbalance. He talks about the percentage of, Black people in the country, white people in the country, and if everything were evenly distributed, for every one Asian person another Asian sees, they would have to see about, I think, 17 white people for that one Asian that they see. And that creates a minority, and kind of reinforces racism. So it's really complex. It was really interesting to hear that, because it's like, in practice, I absolutely know what he's talking about, but kind of talking about it is new for me.
Yeah. And I think it also adds like layers of complexity, because it uses the assumption that when you're starting the book, there is a binary system between like racist and not racist.
Yeah.
And I think adding in, I guess, and describing different like flavors of how you deal with race and how you encounter race throughout your life, it lets you be both more precise in your language and how you think about things, and expands it far past a binary of things you can be or actions you can take. And I think that's really great. I love when ideas acknowledge that the world is hard and complicated. It is.
Yeah, because what he talks about also in that chapter is kind of preservation of culture, which is the point of having, my Indian community, which is the point of having places where people like you gather and are together. There's a reason why we have queer spaces. There's a reason why we have Asian spaces. And it's about not having a monoculture. It's about maintaining diversity in this country.
Yeah, I'll say. So I work for a specifically Pan-Asian organization. I want to talk about ethnicity later, so we're going to bring that up again. But because I work in a specifically Pan-Asian organization, that meant when I started working there, I no longer had to educate my coworkers on what it's like to be Asian in America. And that freed up like 20% of my working time, as opposed to when I was working at, say, predominantly Latino organizers, and especially predominantly white organizers. That having to explain race just took up a lot of my time in a way that it doesn't now, and I am assured
you were performing unpaid labor.
Yeah.
By having to explain your experience as an Asian person to everyone you interacted with. And it's really like, when you don't have to do that, it's like a relief.
Yeah.
It's really great to have that also. Like, I'm not saying don't talk to white people, but it is nice to have places where you don't have to perform that labor.
Yeah. There are spaces where I know it is safe to be like my full self. And one of those spaces right now is work, where I am like very safe to be openly non-binary and openly queer, and bring my full self as like an Asian person to the work that I do. And that's not a guarantee everywhere.
Nope.
So like having those spaces is nice. I happen to be paid to be at that space, and it's pretty great. I will say I love being paid to be there.
Yeah. Speaking of being paid, do you want to talk a little bit about capitalism?
Oh my god, yes. Let's talk about capitalism. First of all, what the fuck?
So this is the part of the book where as we were reading it, I was like, oh, I understand now why this book is being banned. Because while it is an easy target, it is also actually questioning the systems that are the foundation of America, which is capitalism and racism. And one of the things that I didn't love about this book is the way Ibram X. Kendi talked about the way capitalism and racism work in tandem, because he used the phrase conjoined twins, the conjoined twin of racism and capitalism. And I did not love that, because what did conjoined twins ever do to you? And like, being a conjoined twin is a disability. And while, again, Ibram X. Kendi has improved a lot of the ableism that he had in the first edition of the book, I think that's a place where he can improve. And should there be a new edition of this book, I would love to see that phrasing changed. But his point is that racism and capitalism work in tandem, and only focusing on one allows the cycle to continue.
Yeah. I think there is another metaphor that I like more for describing it. So do I have any near me? I do not. So you and I are both fiber artists. We're very familiar with yarn and how we can tie it into knots to make other things. I think most people are to some extent. And the way that yarn works basically is you take multiple, I guess, smaller strands of string, and you weave them together in order to make a thicker and more durable substance. It's the same way you make like thicker things like ropes. It's just a fancy kind of like braid, essentially. And when things work together and interlock, they create a stronger structure for everything else in it. If I knit a sweater, which by God, I'm never doing that, but if I knit a sweater, chances are, if I did a good job and I'm weaving the things together, tying things, doing all of my knits and purls correctly, it would be a strong structure that is an interlocking system that works together to make something distinct and new. But if I say, but that works another thing, so I could use like racism, capitalism, and ideas of ableism, weave that all together, add in some like patriarchy just sprinkled on top, and we have an idea of a really strong society and system of America, essentially. I made an American song. It's sexist, it's racist, it's capitalist, and it reinforces a class structure that is harmful. And it's strong as fuck. And you can untangle maybe a part of it, but it's really hard to get all of one thing out once it's all knit together.
Yeah. You can't just take one color out if you have 7 different colors of yarn in a sweater. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. You have to undo the whole thing and disentangle the whole thing.
You can unravel the entire sweater and reknit.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that is what is required here, because they thrive, racism and capitalism thrives off of each other, especially in the way that we have built our capitalist system in America, to specifically built off of the subjugation of Black bodies historically, and how we have continued to exploit specifically immigrant communities today.
Yeah. Yep. There is a lot of racism at play to reinforce capitalism. I don't. It's like I could come up with examples, but it's kind of like, yeah. But I think the point Ibram X. Kendi is making is that you can't only focus on racism. You have to focus on both. You have to focus on capitalism and racism because they work together to reinforce each other. You have to kind of divorce yourself from the idea of capitalism as this fine thing that's just the markets working together, and if we all follow the rules of the markets, we'll have a just society. Because what capitalism actually is not just the markets all working together to create a just society. It relies on exploitation, and specifically Black exploitation historically. And I think this is just me talking now, this is not in the book, but I think what's happening now is we've exported a lot of that exploitation in America, and we don't see it every day, so we just let it continue occurring.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, one thing that several people have, I would say politically, come to acknowledge is the decrease in American manufacturing as a bad thing, especially as it has shifted our economy to being more of a service economy, in which we are paying, there are more jobs in things like retail, food service, hospitality. And if you have ever talked to anyone who has worked retail, food service, or hospitality, they are very upfront that it is not a good system to be living in. It's not considered to be good jobs.
I worked in like the ideal retail situation, and we still weren't allowed to sit during our shifts. We still weren't allowed to sit. I worked at a lovely independent bookstore. Happy Independent Bookstore Day. Support indie bookstores. But we weren't allowed to sit.
Yeah. Like,
it is not an ideal situation. We dealt with harassment as a majority female and young workforce. It's not easy, and it's not good. And I think a big part of Ibram X. Kendi's message is to support unions when they're not being racist and things like that, which I think is really important to kind of unraveling the harms of capitalism while being anti-racist.
Yeah, I very much so. I think we have a responsibility to like be in solidarity with other people, because there are some people who say that we have a duty to win. We are responsible for winning. We have to win, or we will suffer. Like when it comes to union fights, when it comes to fighting racism, when it comes to fighting capitalism, when it comes to ending sexism, we have to win. There is not another option. But I don't believe we have to win by any means necessary, because I will never sacrifice a different cause or something that does not affect me, or a community that I am not a part of, to further my own.
Yeah, because that just reinforces inequality.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of what he talks about when he talks about Black people who succeed, when he talks about his own parents who raised their children middle class. and decided to look down upon more impoverished Black people, and look at them as thugs who would never come up because look at us, we did it. It's just reinforcing the racist inequality that exists.
Yeah. And it's hard to not live in that system.
Oh yeah. It's really hard.
It is. It's hard. And it's also, there are like going to be times where I mess up as I like organize, as I work towards winning. And it's not, and I have found most of the time when people mess up, it's not malicious. They're just wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also this idea in marginalized communities of kind of wait your turn. That is false. It's the incrementalists' argument, right? It's like, let's give women voting rights first, and then if you wait your turn and be good, you'll get voting rights soon. Like, let's give white women voting rights, and then Black men, you'll get voting rights, and then Black women, you'll get voting rights. You know, it's that. But what people who argue for that forget is that was fought over, that was pushed, and that the only reason we have civil rights is because our people in our country fought for that.
Yeah. We can't fight for incrementalist victories. I will accept the wins when we get them.
Yeah.
But I am fighting for a much bigger, bolder, and better vision of our world, where like every kid gets to go to a good school regardless of what zip code they live in, where all of us have access to our basic needs like food and water and shelter, where everyone has health care, so that when we encounter either an emergency or when, say, we go through a mass disabling pandemic, everybody is taken care of. Everybody has what they need to survive and do well and live in a society in which we take care of each other, because that's what I believe we should live in. I think one thing maybe that'd be good to discuss is, so we're both Asians reading this book.
Yep.
I think if we want to look at the ways that communities have been pitted against each other and fought for incrementalism, we can look at the model minority myth as a whole. So for anybody watching who is unfamiliar, the model minority myth, there was this idea when immigration was finally opened up to accept Asian people. Specifically, they were looking for Asian people who had advanced degrees, which I think we should definitely say that up front. Asian people with advanced degrees entered the country, and there was this wave of immigration, I'd say probably like 70s, 80s.
Yep.
All of these Asian people moved to America, they immigrated, and basically people point out like, wow, these Asian communities are doing way better than Black communities who have been here for generations. Completely ignoring the generational poverty and structural racism that resulted in that, and also the specific immigration policies that sought people who were already of middle class or higher.
Which I want to add is still happening. I work in the immigration industry, and the people that are allowed to come into this country are all highly skilled, meaning they have a huge amount of education, and they're not letting in people who don't. They have degrees on degrees on degrees.
Yeah. And it's still hard to get here.
It's still hard, and it's still very expensive to come
and
here.
There's a long wait list.
Oh yeah.
It is challenging. But when we look at that, we see a system that is entangled to reinforce the racist idea that there is something wrong with Black people. It reinforces the idea of segregation from the Black community for all other races, including Asians. And it reinforces the idea of that Asians can and should assimilate into predominantly white cultures
Yes.
without assessing the various reasons why Asian people have been allowed to come into the US.
Mhm.
Historically, how we have gotten here, whether that be through colonialist practices, like with largely Filipino communities, through refugee status, through like Vietnamese communities and some
Mhm.
Korean communities, or because we asked for people with advanced degrees, which is what you see a lot of like Indian, like, and
Yeah.
Desi communities who immigrated in the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, there are family members of mine who came in because they got into engineering schools, or got into medical programs
Yeah.
in the United States. Like, that's the reason why I have family in this country. So it's absolutely the case.
Yeah. And you have people like me. I'm second generation Asian adoptee.
Mhm.
Asian adoptee from white grandparents.
Yeah.
So like all of our conditions are slightly different, and it gets flattened to encourage us to assimilate.
Mhm.
And it also reinforces the idea that Asians are part of a system in which we places us above Black people instead of seeing us all as equals within the society.
Mhm.
And that's no good, but it is an
No.
ideology that we grew up with, and in some way maybe like accept it.
Yeah, and a lot of Asian people choose to actively reinforce this myth. Ibram X. Kendi cites Dinesh D'Souza a lot, and he is an Indian man with a Portuguese last name. Dinesh, there's a reason why you have a Portuguese last name. It's because of colonialism. And I asked Katrina if I could say this on stream, and Katrina said,
It's your channel.
It's my channel. Dinesh D'Souza is a motherfucker. He actively chooses to act in service of oppressors, act in service to act to reinforce white power, essentially, because he wants to be in proximity to white power, because he believes that is the only way to gain power, is to be in proximity with whiteness, to be close to whiteness. And there are other people I can name like that who are Desi and choose to do that. Nikki Haley, Bobby Jindal, remember him?
Oh yeah, I forgot about him.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that guy?
I don't know. But it's in the book, Ibram X. Kendi talks a lot about specific Black people who have chosen to reinforce racist stereotypes, who have chosen to act in service of the idea that the only way to access power is access to whiteness. And we can see that in all of our own communities, I think. Have you found out?
No, there's nothing on him after his presidential run.
Honestly, good.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, you know what? If he wanted to retire and disappear quietly, that's fine. It does say he is the only living former governor of Louisiana, which makes me a little bit concerned. I don't know if that was a mistake in the Wikipedia or if terrible things have happened to the other governors from Louisiana.
If you value your life, don't become governor of Louisiana, it sounds like.
Yeah, it seems like they don't survive very long after they leave, and I'm a little worried about that. I don't. What happened? Like that can't be right. Is it? I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but I think we need to know.
I think Yeah.
Yeah, no, she's dead. Okay. So the one that was governor before him died.
Okay.
Yeah, this guy's dead. I'm just gonna say he was born in 1930. He's probably dead.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they're all dead. Okay.
Okay.
One
Well,
died. The one before Bobby Jindal died recently.
okay. So he hasn't been the only living former Louisiana governor for very long.
Yeah, just like 3 years. But like that's a little concerning.
That's a little concerning. Anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about something, a couple of things he could have covered in this book, but didn't. I think there were a couple things that if there's a new edition of this book, or if he wants to write follow-ups to this book, could be really interesting to read about, such as like medical racism, especially towards Black women. There is a lot to talk about there, and obviously there are other things we can read. That's why I know about it. But I don't know. I do really want to hear this scholar's thoughts on all of that, especially because he discusses his wife's cancer fight and his mother's cancer fight, in addition to his own, at the end of the book. I think there's a lot of space for that conversation, should he want to have it. And I would have liked to... He has a chapter on queerness and homophobia and transphobia. He mostly talks about his own journey towards being less homophobic and transphobic, which I appreciate, and talks a lot about the queer women mostly, the queer Black women mostly, who kind of helped him unlearn homophobia and transphobia, which I really appreciate. And he, cites Angela Davis and other queer scholars in that chapter, but it was a very quick chapter. I think he didn't want to talk more. He didn't want to talk over queer voices in this space, and I appreciate that. But again, one of those things I think could have been covered more. Wasn't, but it, is fine.
Yeah. I think my experience of reading this book was I definitely wanted more out of certain sections on like gender, on sexuality, on disability.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I am, reminded that this is one person who, while utilizing academic texts, is talking about his own experience. And that is the experience of a cis, I believe straight, Black man in America. So I appreciated, I appreciated that he cited other people and told me where to go next for the things that I want.
Exactly. I really appreciated that. And then one more thing that, as we were talking, I remember that I feel like he alluded to but didn't really discuss is the propaganda machine in America. He calls the people who have tried to ban this book propagandists, because that's what they are. They are not news people or telling the truth in any way, shape, or form. And because he was a journalism major, I think there was room for him to talk about that more. He discussed kind of his own flirtations with conspiracy theories about white people being aliens at one point, but I feel like there was room for a discussion on propaganda and how that perpetuates racist ideology as well, because it's a lot, and it's a daily deluge for people who watch certain news channels of racist ideology being fed into their brains.
Yeah, and I will say, look, this is coming in the weeks after Fox News, which is now not even the most racist news network, is not the most propagandist news network, but it is the news network that recently had to settle for $787.5 million for lying about our voting systems. It is the one that also recently fired Tucker Carlson, so you know.
Which
eventually you get bad enough.
They're claiming that it's because he was sexist in text messages and stuff, but I think it has something to do with the voting system settlement.
Yeah.
But that's besides the point.
There are lots of things wrong with Tucker Carlson.
There are a lot of things. Yeah. But yeah, I think this book was republished in 2020. So he discusses the pandemic a lot. But obviously things have changed in the pandemic in the last 3 years. So I think we're responding to that. We're responding to Joe Biden having been elected president. And, you know, responding to a lot of other things that have occurred in the last 3 years that obviously, you know, you can't go back in time and rewrite your book to more accurately reflect the modern day. Yeah. And
I think it was a pretty good book.
Yeah, it was a really good book, and I really loved the focus on policies. I loved the focus on history. It was amazing. I highly recommend everyone read it.
Yeah. And I feel like one thing that was really, I don't know if it was ever like explicitly said, but because we're talking about policies and decisions that people made, because we're talking about a history of systems of policies and laws that people made, we can just make new ones. We're people.
Yep. And I mean, you know what? The Republicans are just making new ones and ruining lives, so we can make new ones that aren't.
Yeah. I think my job, once again, is specifically to build Asian American power in Pennsylvania. I get paid to do that, and I get paid to ally with other communities of color. Because I'm not going to live under this racist system for that much longer. Pretty determined to not live like that. But we can make new ones. I believe that when we all work together, we can absolutely overpower, outvote, unfortunately have to overcome terrible voting laws that restrict our freedoms and our abilities to vote. But we can out-organize and we can win because we are people, just like the people that made these racist policies and decisions, and we can do better than them.
Yep. So speaking of, I think in our wrap-up, there are a couple things we can... tapping well. There are a couple things we can do to work against the bad policies and work towards better ones. Two things you can do with your dollar, because we are in a capitalist system, is donate to organizations working for trans rights across America. The ACLU is working really hard against the drag bans and anti-trans bills. There are a lot of smaller organizations in every single state that are working towards making better policies for trans people. And there are also a lot of abortion and reproductive rights organizations that really need our money right now to fight against abortion bans.
If anybody lives in Ohio or has money that they want to give to Ohio around abortion specifically, they are trying to put a ballot measure protecting abortion on the ballot for this next election. There are a lot of organizations in Ohio that could use your money to make sure people are out getting enough petitions, that people can door knock and talk to their neighbors about protecting our ability to choose if, when, and how we have kids and grow our families. So shout out to Ohio. Because also, if it gets protected there, it's actually going to be a lot easier for me to get an appointment in Western Pennsylvania for to see my regular doctor. So that'd be cool.
That's great. Yeah.
Let's help Ohio, everyone.
Let's help Ohio. And if you live in a state where things are looking grim right now, there is always something you can do. You can call your representatives. You can call people. I love that for Ohio. You can call representatives. You can do the door knocking if there is some sort of ballot measure that you really believe in. You can convince people to vote in the people's best interests. So yeah. Also, in terms of banned books specifically, if there are banned books, if there are books being challenged in your areas, go to your school board meeting. I think Katrina can talk a little bit more about this as you are a member of your school board.
Yeah. So I'm going to put on screen real quick. This is a link that you can donate to support Asian American candidates. Specifically, everything from people running for judges and mayors in Pennsylvania to school board candidates. Like me, I'm not one of the people they're giving money to. I'm raising it, and that would be an illegal problem. But we're specifically backing candidates in places like Central Bucks School District, which has been making the news because they are spending over $1 million retaining lawyers to defend policies that they are being sued by the ACLU for, because they're taking down quotes from like Holocaust survivors, because it promotes an ideology, because they are banning pride flags from being in classrooms, or teachers putting up those safe space stickers, because they are trying to make it more difficult for kids to play sports and banning a heck ton of books.
Yeah.
So when you donate, we could put that money towards electing better people. So when you go to a school board meeting, it's not crazy. So it's not, maybe that's not the right word. So it's not a destructive and chaotic time that is built upon destroying the freedoms of our children.
There we go.
Yeah, we did it. So that's one cool thing you can do. Because when you go to a school board meeting, one thing I like is when people show up to school board meetings. My favorite thing is the beginning of the meeting, like once a month, where we bring kids in for special recognition. Our basketball and swim team at my school recently both made it to their state competitions.
Oh, hey, that's awesome.
And we got to say like, hey, you did a great job and are achieving excellence in a field where you have worked hard. They get a special certificate, they get recognition, and that's great. A lot of parents stay for just that part of the meeting. But if you stay for the whole meeting, you might get to hear about ways we're working to make the school more accessible and speak on that. You might hear about how you might be able to voice up about protecting arts and music education, or protecting our children's freedom to read, and make sure you have input in how your local school system is run so that every child receives an excellent education. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely worth it, because there are people who are going to school districts where they do not live, and are very loudly making their voices heard to discourage school boards from putting into place policies that would help all of our kids. I actually recently received a questionnaire from the American Family Association, a known hate group. I'm not going to fill it out.
No.
They know enough. I'm sure there's enough on me online for them to do whatever they want with.
But is it because you're a school board member that they're sending?
It is because I am a school board candidate.
Got it. Okay.
So they sent them out to everyone in Pennsylvania, but they're organized as hell, and they're trying to make it so we cannot protect our kids. So we are stripping the rights of parents of color and queer parents, and the ability to teach our children better and do better, and to solve big problems through honest and equitable education, because they are afraid that if we do that, they will lose power. So go to your school board meetings. It's a great way to do everything. Oh, actually, Untapped Ink said school board meetings are excellent, and so is supporting your public library and advocating for them to get more funding.
Support your public library. Public librarians are going through a lot right now. Support your public library. I am doing so by just, going to my public library, going to their events. But I mean, I live in a great city with a great library system that is being threatened right now by the mayor. So showing up to support is really important.
Yeah. Once again, cannot stress this enough. This donate link, gonna say it again. One of the candidates we're backing is Helen Kim for mayor of Philadelphia, who has been described as the opposite of Eric Adams. Not by me, but by
Wow.
someone said that, and I was like, they meant it
Wow.
as an insult, but it's so good.
Can she run here?
No, she's gonna keep living in Philadelphia, which is sadly not where I live either.
We
But,
really
like,
need the anti-Eric Adams.
we do. But yeah, show up for your local government. Show up for your local librarians, for your school
Mhm.
board. Contact your reps at every level to advocate for more funding, even in
Mhm.
education in your library system.
Yep.
We can do better.
Yep.
Okay,
Absolutely.
There's. Do you want to do
The next one?
yeah. Where are we?
I don't know. You can also, if you live in Katrina's school district, you can vote for Katrina. That would be great. I officially endorse you.
Thank you so much. As my best friend, I would expect nothing less. You cannot vote for me because you live too far away, but I accept the endorsement.
And speaking of candidates for office, Joe Biden recently announced his candidacy for president in the next national election cycle. And what you can do is yell at him. You can write, you can call, you can push him because he is currently the most powerful man in the United States, as much as he likes to deny it, to protect abortion rights, to protect trans rights and LGBT rights, and protect school districts from book bans and protect librarians. He can do a lot. He is choosing not to. And if he wants to get voted back into office, he's going to need to show up, and we can yell at him to do so.
Yeah. Definitely help. It helps if you have a specific issue you care about. Please contact your representatives at every level of government. Let them know that you care about it and what hopefully anti-racist policies you would like them to implement to make our world better. Because one of the great things about being an American is the ability to just yell at people, to exercise your free speech, to tell powerful people that they're wrong sometimes. I was very lucky this week. I got to write a thank you note to one of my representatives. Love that for her. But yeah, if you need to go the other way, that's also fine.
Yeah,
sometimes we deserve a lot. We deserve to live in a better world.
We deserve equitable government. We deserve equitable policies. We deserve an anti-racist country. And we need to fight like hell to do that.
Yeah. And we will. I personally am still waiting for the student loan decision. Love that to happen. But like, if I need to elect an entirely new class to like the Pennsylvania House of Representatives next year, I'll do what I need to get abortion rights. I will do what I need to get the freedom to like choose when my family will get larger. I will fight like hell to make sure every person has health care and access to good, equitable health care where they can get the care that they need. And I will fight like hell to make sure our kids can have the freedom to read the books that they want. The books that they're interested in, and the books that expose them to new ideas and people. And it's going to take a lot of work, but we're going to do it. And on that note, please check your voter registration. Sometimes it can lapse. Some states have been purging the voter rolls, trying to get rid of dead people, but sometimes they make mistakes.
One thing this book talked about was the Bush election of 2000, and that happened. A lot of people lost their access to vote. A lot is happening in the state of North Carolina right now with voter accessibility, and a lot of other things. Basically, the North Carolina Supreme Court is just throwing away the old North Carolina Supreme Court's decisions. So check your voter registration.
Please do. No matter where you live, if especially if you have maybe recently changed your name, moved, have someone like just check it. And then also you might be able to request a mail-in ballot soon, depending on where you live. That might be available for an odd year election. Get that if that's how you want to vote. And just generally make sure you're prepared to make your voice heard in any and all avenues of power available to you.
And we can, I think, wrap up and say our next book is going to be That One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki, which I'm very excited about. It's a graphic novel. It's going to be a lot lighter than the past few books we've been reading, I think. And yeah, it's going to be on Katrina's channel. So subscribe to Katrina's channel so you don't miss the live stream.
Yeah. I picked an Asian book for Asian Pacific American History Month.
Yes.
And I also picked a fiction book because we've been reading a lot of nonfiction and it's hard and I want a break.
We deserve a break.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone who has joined us. We will see you next month on my channel, or if you can check down below and join our Discord and talk about this book and all of the other books we've previously read as part of the Banned Books Club.
Yep. All right. Have a fantastic rest of your Sunday. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye. And